Hello, everybody. Jax James, your state policy manager with NORML, back today to talk with you about newly filed and moving legislation across the country. So you will find in the description of this live stream the link to today's blog post, as well as some other helpful links for you guys. So definitely click there so that you can follow along if you would like. And of course, as always, please post in the comments where you're watching from. So if I don't get to your state through the update, I can definitely go back and check and see what legislation is moving in your state. So drop where you're at in the comments and we'll go ahead and we'll get started today. So we're going to go by topic like we've been doing the last couple times. I've really been enjoying doing it that way. I hope you have too. I'll cover legalization, decriminalization, medical access, any additional bills that we support, and then bills we oppose, because yes, there is some bad legislation out there. So let's start in Delaware. It's a big day today in Delaware. There's two bills. One has to deal with depenalization and one has to do with legalization. So HB1 would remove all penalties associated with cannabis, except for those under the age of 21. And this personal use amount would be defined as 1 ounce or less of leaf cannabis, 12 grams or less of concentrate, and any THC products containing 750 milligrams or less of Delta-9 THC. So this bill, HB1, has passed out of the House with the supermajority, and the bill next is scheduled for a hearing in the Health and Human Social Services today in the Senate. So hopefully, we'll see that move out of that committee really quickly. Great news in Delaware. The other bill in Delaware that's currently moving is HB2, also known as the Delaware Marijuana Control Act. It regulates and taxes adult use sales, promotes equality and inclusion in the industry from communities that have been disproportionately impacted by prohibition, and then reinvests a portion of tax revenue into those impacted communities. The bill also creates guidelines and outlines the process for introducing a recreational market and industry there in Delaware. This bill also has passed the House with a supermajority and is also scheduled in the same committee in the Senate today. Again, really hopeful that we will get a vote out of committee soon. So if you are in Delaware, if you know anyone in Delaware, make sure that you share this action link with them so that they can participate and let their legislators know, especially their senators, that they support this. We would love to get a supermajority in both chambers so that the governor would not be able to hopefully veto it because in the past, Governor Carney has not been necessarily supportive. So definitely please help us reach that goal. Now, in Florida, there's newly filed legislation, Senate Bill 1576, that would legalize cannabis. It would establish the Division of Cannabis Management, legalize possession of up to 2.5 ounces of cannabis flower for personal use, and would even provide for the home cultivation of up to 6 plants for individuals in their own private residences. Now, we've been tracking the legalization bills in Maryland. As you guys know, Maryland passed a referendum back in November to legalize cannabis, and these are the bills that will create the statutory structure for that. So there's two bills, House Bill 556 and Senate Bill 516, that would allow select cannabis businesses to serve both medical patients and for those adults that would like to use cannabis legally. The bill would create an avenue for on-site consumption licenses, consuming cannabis in a social setting, and it institutes certain parental and personal protections for both medical and adult use consumers. Additionally, the bills increase the amount of cannabis that a registered patient can possess up to 4 and flowers together is hard to say. 4 ounces of flower, 36 grams of THC, and up to 4 plants for home cultivation. Currently, patients are not allowed to cultivate in their homes, so some really important changes in Maryland. Now, the update here is that House Bill 556 was amended and passed the House. The members of the Senate's Finance Committee debated on 516 in the Senate on 3-9, but they have not yet voted on that, so we're hoping to see that move forward shortly. Now, having to do with decriminalization, there is one new bill in Alabama that has been filed, Senate Bill 42, which would revise the criminal code in Alabama to reduce the penalties for possession down to a $200 fine. Currently, possession of any amount of cannabis in the state of Alabama is a felony, punishable by incarceration. So Just a little bit unreasonable there, friends. Now, I'm going to go on to medical access and some different legislation having to do with that. But if you're watching, definitely make sure you drop where you're watching from in the comments. That way, if I didn't touch on your state because of, this is an update about moving or new legislation, but there are about 400 different bills that we're currently tracking, maybe almost 500. And so I'm not going to go over all of those in a live stream in one day. So I would be more than happy to go back and look at those things for you. So we've got some news in Kansas. Senate Bill 135 would allow medical cannabis to be cultivated, distributed, sold, and used in the state of Kansas. Patients without a medical card, though, would be subjected to a $400 fine if they cannot provide evidence from their physician that they were recommended to use medical cannabis for a qualifying condition. Now, SB 135 is scheduled for a hearing in the Senate Committee on Federal and State Affairs today. So if you are in Kansas, definitely make sure that you participate in that action alert and let your legislators know that you do support this legislation. Furthermore, Kentucky, we've got two bills, companion bills, SB 47 and HB 107, that would establish a medical cannabis program for authorized patients, where patients would be able to have a 30-day supply of cannabis products at their residency and a 10-day supply on their person. However, the legislation does not allow for inhaled cannabis uptake methods, nor does it allow for home cultivation. The update here is that Senate Bill 47 passed the Committee on Licensing and Occupations and now heads to the Senate floor, where it is expected to be voted on sometime later this week. Now, in New Hampshire, there's quite a bit of legislation moving. There is some legalization bills there as well. But this bill, HB 431, has to do with permitting qualified patients and their designated caregivers to cultivate cannabis for therapeutic use. Registered patients would be permitted to grow up to 6 plants, 3 of which could be mature. Under existing law, qualified patients have to purchase cannabis from retailers. They are not allowed to home cultivate. And recently, the New Hampshire Therapeutic Cannabis Medical Oversight Board, that is a mouthful, voted to endorse legalizing medical marijuana home cultivation. So the really great news here is that HB 431 has passed the Okay, this is a hard one to say too, apparently today. The House Health, Human Services, and Elderly Affairs Committee. Mouthful and a lot of H's in that one. So great news in New Hampshire. We hope to see this move to the floor pretty quickly. So definitely make sure that if you're watching in New Hampshire, you send a letter to your legislator. Now, in North Dakota, there is legislation, SB 2068, which raises the 30-day cap of milligrams of THC. Now, under current law, registered patients are not permitted to purchase or possess a supply of THC-infused products totaling more than 4,000 milligrams in a 30-day period. Now, this legislation would lift that cap up to 6,000 milligrams. The Senate has amended and passed their Senate version, 33-14. The House passed an amended version as well, 77-16. And the legislation now heads to the governor's desk. So definitely those of you watching in North Dakota, this is an important increase for patients. Although we think that that type of cap is arbitrary, increasing it is definitely beneficial. Now, in my home state where I am right now, in Texas, there's some legislation that would change the Texas Compassionate Use Program. HB 1805 and its companion SB 1747 would add chronic pain as a qualifying condition. Additionally, it would authorize the Department of State Health Services, rather than lawmakers, to designate new qualifying conditions. Additionally, there's work to increase the allowable THC content from currently 1% to 5%. However, there's a committee substitute that we haven't quite seen yet because there was a hearing, awesome, for HB 1805 on the 13th, so on Monday, and that did have a committee substitute. While we haven't read it, the office has told us that what it would do is it would remove any type of THC cap by dry weight or or yes, by dry weight, and rather would substitute volumetric dosing, which is more in line with what you see with most medications that you get. So HB 1805 was heard on Monday and is pending a vote. It's very common in Texas for it to take a week or two to vote on a bill. So we are hoping to see that bill come out of committee soon. If you're watching from Texas, definitely make sure you participate in our action alert so that we can get this bill moving. We've got some deadlines coming up and we definitely want to see it advance. So let's get into some additional legislation. Actually, you know what? Real quick before we do that, I'm just going to come to the comments over here right fast and see where you guys watching from. All right. So looking over here, we've got Texas. All right. We just talked about that. Philadelphia, Virginia, Mississippi, Ohio, and California. All right. Thanks for joining, guys. Anybody else who wants to comment where you're watching from, I will use those comments to verify and see if there's any other bills in your state that I didn't cover today. Because, of course, as I mentioned, we've got almost 500 bills we're tracking. I'm not going over all of them today, friends. Just the ones that are new and moving. So let's talk about some of our additional priorities. So in Illinois, there's actually quite a few bills pending that would expunge or seal the records of juveniles and adults with minor cannabis convictions. Multiple of these bills have been scheduled for a hearing as of last week on the 7th and 8th and are pending movement from those committees. So definitely participate in those action alerts right there and make sure that those committee members know that you want them to advance this legislation quickly. In Maine, we have LD 555, which would amend existing home cultivation limits. Under the measure, adults would be permitted to cultivate 6 mature plants, 12 immature plants, and an unlimited number of seedlings if the person is 21 and up and has adequate land. So this bill has passed out of the House Committee of Veteran and Legal Affairs and now heads to the House floor. So definitely message your representative today to let them know that when it gets to the floor, we would like them to vote yes on that legislation. Now, in Missouri, HB 425 authorizes financial institutions to provide services to organizations that participate in the marijuana industry. As you guys know, this has been a big barrier for a lot of businesses in the industry. And if passed, the bill would allow cannabis businesses in Missouri to transition from cash only transactions to financial credit services within the banking industry. This bill is scheduled for a hearing in the House Financial Institutions Committee on the 21st of this month. So definitely click that link and let your representatives in the Missouri House know that you support HB 425. Now, in New Mexico, we've got HB 314, which expunges records of anyone charged with an offense involving low-level possession prior to the adoption of the Cannabis Regulation Act. HB 314 has passed the House. It has also passed the Senate Health and Public Affairs Committee. It now heads to the Senate floor. So definitely let your senators know in New Mexico that you support this legislation. In Nevada, new legislation has been filed, AB 253, which legalizes cannabis events. For example, social use of cannabis in licensed places, and begins with the issuance of a cannabis event organizer license. Upon passage, the public consumption of cannabis would still be illegal, but sanctioned events in which consumers and patients would be allowed to openly consume amongst each other would be made legal, providing that the event was organized by a licensed cannabis event organizer and is in compliance with regulations. So that legislation is new in Nevada. Please go ahead and support that. Now, in Washington, we've got SB 5123, which prevents the restriction of job opportunities based on an applicant's past cannabis use. If passed, the bill would make it unlawful for an employer to discriminate against a job applicant solely based on their off-the-clock cannabis use away from the workplace. So SB 523 has passed the Senate by a vote of 28 to 21. The bill is now scheduled for a hearing in the House Committee on Labor and Workplace Standards, actually as of yesterday, and it is pending a vote there. So hopefully we'll see that one advance to the Senate floor quickly. Definitely let your senators know in Washington that you support that. Now let's talk about two bills that we don't like it. We don't like these bills. We oppose these bills. But but they're still moving. So in Kentucky, definitely pay attention to this one. Senate Bill 228 imposes an arbitrary THC blood limit of 5 nanograms per milliliter for drivers. And as we've mentioned before, NORML opposes such per se limits because the presence of THC in the blood is not consistent as a predicator of psychomotor impairment. So just because you have THC in your system doesn't mean that you are impaired to drive. That could have been THC from days ago. It could have been THC from weeks ago. So of course we want to make sure that this type of legislation is scientific and fact-based, and unfortunately these per se limits are not. Now, SB 228 has passed the Kentucky Senate and it's now heading to the House. So definitely, if you're paying attention in Kentucky, please join us in imposing that effort. Now, the last bill I want to talk about before I come back over to your comments is in Missouri. House Bill 295 establishes a new offense of possession of a container of marijuana in a motor vehicle. Specifically, it penalizes the driver with an open container of marijuana on any public road with a Class A misdemeanor. A Class A misdemeanor, Missouri's most severe misdemeanor classification, has the potential punishment of up to a year in jail or a fine of up to $2,000. Now, this legislation is scheduled for a hearing in the House Crime Prevention and Public Safety Committee back on the 9th, and it is still pending a vote from that committee. So definitely those of you watching from Missouri, help us oppose that, please. That would be great. So I'm going to come back over to the comments over here and chat with you guys a little bit about what's going on in each of your states. So I also want to mention that in the description, in addition to having, the link to today's blog, you'll also find a link that that will take you to the ACT page, normal.org/ACT. And when you go to that page, you'll see there's 2 or 3 federal actions there that you can participate in. And then underneath it, you'll see that there is a dynamic map. And if you hover over your state, it will pop up any active legislation that is going on in your state. So if you have not heard your state in today's update, that does not mean that there's not legislation. I encourage you to go there and check that out. So I'm coming to the comments, and we're going to go through some of these that I had not covered yet. So number 1, I see Texas here. Quick update overall. There's about 26, 27 something-ish bills in Texas that have been filed having to do with legalization, penalty reduction, medical cannabis access, and back in February, there was a hearing for one of our priority bills, HB 218. It did pass out of committee last week and is in the calendars committee, hopefully going to be on the House floor pretty soon. So we definitely want to build support for that. Please participate in that action alert. I mentioned the medical cannabis bill that had a hearing on Monday. Very hopeful it will be voted on shortly, so please participate there. And of course, there are quite a few bills having to do with legalization, which is a really important topic for us to discuss in Texas. Even if they're not ready, and I don't like that they're not ready, we can have the conversations. And my goal is definitely to make sure that we get a hearing there. Now, I see people from Pennsylvania. Sorry, my mouse is not working properly today, and so I'm having to click on my keyboard, and I'm really sorry if it's making me shaky, but I want to make sure that I get you all of the right information. So down in Pennsylvania, here we go. There is a bit of legislation having to do with DUI there. So please make sure that you go to normal.org/ACT and participate there. Now in Virginia, there's a few bills because I see Virginia on here that are awaiting or on the governor's desk. And so you can go there and see those action alerts that you can participate in. Now in Mississippi, the crossover date has occurred there, and it looks like all of the filed legislation in Mississippi, unfortunately, did not make it through. So I'm sorry, Mississippi. There's no more bills right now. Sorry about that. Now let's see. In Ohio, we do have a bill having to do with per se limits, which I discussed earlier about with that Kentucky bill. So please do help us oppose that legislation. Coming back over here, California. I know that there's a couple bills, and I think even some of them have some hearings coming up next month. Yes, there's legislation having to do with seniors in pain, cannabis lounges, cannabis food, and equity. There's going to be some hearings in April and March for those. So please participate in those action alerts and make sure that you are staying tuned to California NORML. They are super on top of their game there. And if you go to their website, you'll see every bill that they're tracking right now listed out. You'll also find their action alerts on our normal.org/act. So I went over Maryland. I see Georgia on here. Let's see. Now in Georgia, we've got a decriminalization bill, a bill for medical improvements, a depenalization bill, a pardons bill, and a bill that would force some dispensaries to open because, as you know, there's a low THC cannabis program there, but no way to get the low THC cannabis. Why? Why, Georgia? All right. Nevada, I went over that recently. Alaska, actually, I think that there is a bill in Alaska. Yes, restrictions on the release of conviction records. So it's kind of like an expungement component. So definitely those of you watching from Alaska, please participate in that. All right, Oregon. Let's see, where are you at, Oregon? We've got an employment protections bill. We've got one that will add conditions and protect nurses. So that's what's going on in Oregon. Then I see Missouri, which we went over already. But I only went over the ones that are moving in Missouri. There are actually quite a few bills in Missouri. Let me see. Yeah, Missouri has early release for marijuana offenses, medical parental protections, medical patient privacy, being able to have your medical cannabis on campus, removing odor as a cause for search, removing licensing caps, the banking bill that I talked about, and then the open container bill that I talked about. So that's what's going on in Missouri. Well, guys, it looks like them's the states that you've put in the comments for me. So I appreciate y'all engaging with me on that so we can make sure that you are ready and prepared. I definitely encourage you to share normal.org/act with all of your friends to see if they have something that they can participate with in their state. And of course, there's always our federal action alerts that you can participate in as well. If you have not reached out to your local chapter, you can use the link in the description or in the live stream below, and it will take you to our chapters page. And if there's not a chapter in your area and you're interested in starting one, there's even information on how you can start your own chapter there. So I will go ahead and thank all of y'all for watching this update. We've got some great bills moving across the country. We've got some great newly filed bills. It's really shaping up to be a great legislative session. I'm excited for people in Delaware and Minnesota and Maryland, and we're going to have some more hopefully regulated markets opening up there. And then of course places like where I'm at in Texas, that's much more conservative and limited, getting some more expansion and some more inclusion for medical cannabis and stopping some of the harms from prohibition. So I know there's a lot of different people watching from a lot of different places, and not all of us have the same laws. So thank you so much for tuning in. I encourage you to click on the blog, click on normal.org/act so you can be fully up to date on everything going on in your state. And of course, I encourage you to become a member of NORML. You know, NORML is a consumer and patient advocacy nonprofit, and we focus on empowering activists to engage in their legislature or at the ballot box. And we do that based on funding solely from our members and one-time or repeat donors. And so definitely encourage you guys to become a part of the NORML team so that we can continue to advance legislation across the country. So thank you so much for tuning in, you guys. I am looking forward to being back with you again next week on Wednesday, and we can talk about more marijuana legislation. So happy hump day, y'all. Bye.